Tony, and hello, everybody. My name is Sanjeev Shah. I'm Chief Investment Officer of Sun Global Investments. We're a company based in London, and we specialize in all financial markets, particularly fixed income and equities. But we're also involved in currencies. But to discuss this topic with me, I have Murali Akela. And what I'll do is I will introduce him first to us. He's the expert and will be taking the masterclass. And then I will ask him a few questions and we will proceed from there. So Murali is CEO of Rational FX, which is a company which a lot of your viewers will know very well. A platform called TransferWise, which I know very well, and I've been a very happy user of it. I've used it many times to transfer money to India, and it works very, very well. It's a very impressive technology platform. In addition, Murali has also worked for Standard Chartered and for Accenture. He's a graduate of the Indian Institute, a very prestigious institution in India, and an MBA from INSEAD in France. So welcome, Murali. And the topic is called Currencies of the Future, Preparing for the Revolution in Money. The first question I'd like to ask you is, the currencies we use today, by and large, work very well. So is there really a need for a new currency? Is there really a revolution, or is there a lot of hype in this arena?
Thank you very much for introducing me, Sanjeev, and thank you again, everybody, for having me here. It's a privilege and an honor. I'm quite, sort of excited to be talking about, what it means for currencies, and are they really evolving, i.e. do they need to really change what they're doing right now? And we'll also, I think over the course of the session also talk about, do they need changing per se, or are they fundamentally broken that they need to be replaced? So in response to your question then, Sanjeev, what is actually, going on in the world of currencies that have, generally worked so far? We have our pound sterling, our Indian rupee, our US dollar, our Australian dollar, whatever. These are fundamentally commodities, right? I mean, these are things that, don't change their value. If you take a 10-pound note and then you put it in water and then put it back again, it still is, valued at 10 pounds. So its value doesn't, really change. What it does, however, change is its value relative to other currencies. So how many dollars do you get for 1 pound, and how many euros do you get for a pound? That fluctuates in the currency markets. And as we well know, that's the FX markets. That's one of the world's largest and most liquid markets every day.
And often with a lot of volatility. And indeed, of course, yes. Bitcoin has been in the news a lot. Its value has fluctuated very greatly.
That's correct. So I think, we now have a bridge, right, between, so we have these existing currencies, and there's a popular name for it. They're called the fiat currencies, which is, the currencies that we know about. Now, alternative currencies effectively are another sort of way in which a technology is manifested for exchanging goods and services. And that technology is called DLT. It's a loving 3-letter acronym. It's called the distributed ledger technology. And what that uses is a blockchain technology. What it means is that if you have a ledger of accounts that states that Murali has 100, sort of units to him, Sanjeev has 20 units, Krishan has 15 units, and they're all maintained in a record. There's one bank that holds the record, and then that bank is the only one that can change, edit, add to its records. Distributed ledger says that it's actually, that information is split among 10 different data sources.
And cannot be changed, right?
Correct. So if you want to make a change to any of it, then all of them will have to be made aware, and all of them will also have to approve, right? And when that happens, technically, nobody is considered to be the single owner for it. So there isn't a single sort of owning entity, not even central banks. Now, what then people realized is there can be an exchange of value here. So I can basically say, here's X units from my account to your account. give me goods and services in return in the offline world. So I send you 5 units and I say, please send me a DVD. I give you 10 units and say, please send me a TV, right? So this can happen. People then started calling this a currency. And then they said, where there is a value of in goods and services, let's attach a certain value to this and then name it a new currency and call it the cryptocurrency, simply because it uses blockchain as the underlying technology. Now, we have seen.
So just to clarify, um, blockchain is a technology which I can see can have a lot of potentially good uses, but cryptocurrency is a very separate thing. It's almost like it's a one particular use of blockchain technology. Is that right?
Exactly, precisely. It is a specific use case of blockchain where there is a manifested currency equivalent going on. And that's what we tend to call them by different labels, right? So those labels can be Bitcoin, they can be Ethereum, can be whatever else, stable coins that the banks are issuing. It depends on the initial coin offering and basically who is issuing these coins, right? I mean, who is giving out Bitcoins for the world to use, sell, interchange value between themselves and then trade on the market, right? So if, for example, you trust JP Morgan, then you would potentially, hold their stable coin. If you like Goldman Sachs more, perhaps theirs. If you like Bitcoin, then perhaps that.
But how is that different from if you are a currency trader and, for example, Turkey has been in the news recently, and you decide you don't like Turkey, you can sell the Turkish currency and you say you prefer the bank and you trust them more, you'll buy pounds.
Correct.
What is the difference between that and, as you say, these competing cryptocurrencies?
Cryptocurrencies have no owner. There is no central bank to it. So it's owned by nobody, and at the same time, it is owned by everybody. So it's that distributed ledger technology that is, that effectively is at play here. Now, what that means is, if you like crypto, you keep crypto. You don't like it, you sell it in the market. Now, that's where it differs from your example of Turkish lira versus GBP. Bitcoin actually trades, behaves, and as we have seen in the past, actually gives you returns as an equity. It's like a stock. It's not really behaving as a currency. Currencies fundamentally shouldn't be that volatile that it can be held by so many people around the world. So if you see the dollar, for instance, if it moved 1% in any given day compared to any other currency,
that would be
there's going to be a huge furrow, right? I mean, you'll have like half the markets, roiling around and they'll stop trading and all that. Bitcoin, on the other hand, goes 25% and nobody blinks an eye. So it's basically, it behaves and is structurally sort of, the market is reacting to it as if it reacts to equity and not really as if, it's a currency to it. But again, this is, again, my personal view, right? This is not in any way representative of everybody who's watching as well. There are strong arguments that can be made that the current sort of currencies that we have both micro and macroeconomic problems, and therefore, as a solution, forget about all the currencies. Let's just have something that works on a different technology, and then we are trying to add sort of features and value to it in a way that it sort of almost replaces existing economic activity. The most notable of which we've seen is Elon Musk saying you can buy a Tesla tomorrow with Bitcoin.
But in order to buy a Tesla with a Bitcoin, let's say I have pounds, I have to go and buy Bitcoin and then convert it into, and the process for buying Bitcoin is not very clear. Most people don't know how you would actually go and buy Bitcoin. There have been various exchanges which hold your Bitcoin for you. And there have been many stories of fraud. And there's also been many stories where people had a lot of Bitcoin, which they had a long time ago, which suddenly worth a lot of money. And they can't remember how to get access to it. And they've lost all that money. So it sounds a little bit dangerous to your financial health.
Yeah, I think these are newsworthy articles, right, where people forget a password and lose out on a couple million. It just sounds like such a funky news bite that it sticks, but it's a one-off case. But let's probably discount that, right? But to take the other examples that you have taken, where, for example, the process of getting access to bitcoins is not as straightforward as you would, go to the, Tesco down the road, and then, you can exchange your pounds for smaller notes. You can go to the Western Union store down the road and then exchange it for some other currency. It's not as straightforward. Partially because Bitcoin offers its users anonymity. And that basically says, because there is nobody who's the owner of that currency, you have a perfect record. Where did this Bitcoin originate from? So it originated from my desk, went to Kishan's, then went to Sanjeev's, and then Sanjeev's then went to X supermarket, which bought that particular kilo of tomatoes, and then those are getting shipped out. So that record is perfect, but then it does not divulge to anybody else who are the actors in that chain. And it is structured with a security protocol that is so tight that anybody who wants access to it legitimately also cannot have it. It's therefore shrouded in secrecy, and this therefore.
But it sounds like it will be very secure, that people cannot steal it. I mean, assuming you don't lose your password, you cannot lose. Somebody cannot steal it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, this is, I think, akin to having non-resident accounts sitting in Switzerland. Say that anywhere in India, and it's a taboo thing to have a Swiss bank account, right? Because they will not tell anybody else, what you have going on there. So
it's the fabled Swiss numbered account.
Exactly. Exactly.
Nobody will know.
Having Bitcoin is similar to that, right? Transacting in Bitcoin is similar to that. You could effectively buy some really nefarious stuff off the internet, and nobody would be none the wiser if you used your Bitcoin or your cryptocurrency to purchase. But that being said, it gives security to the underlying user, right? So if people trust the system, and the system then gives people anonymity, you can argue both ways, right? That it's providing security, but it also gives very legitimate access to nefarious activity, which is why, it's not that straightforward to get access to Bitcoin. You need to jump through several hoops, give probably, enhanced due diligence. And also for these firms that provide access to cryptocurrencies, they go through incredible amounts of enhanced due diligence themselves with their counterparties, like banks or FX providers or whoever else, right?
So, Murali, let's take a practical look that people might be interested in how they can use Bitcoin, if at all. So I was just saying before the break, if you go into a first year economics class on money, the professor will tell you that for anything to be money, it must satisfy 4 requirements. It must facilitate transactions. It must be a store of value. It must be a unit of account, and it must be generally acceptable. So the first one is, does it facilitate transactions? I.e., can I go into any shop or any, perhaps online nowadays, and buy something apart from a Tesla using a cryptocurrency?
Yes, you can. I think if you flip the question around and say, is crypto accepted everywhere? The answer is probably no. There still is a way to go for most of the economy to catch up. But I mean, for the most part, yes, there is a technical way in which an exchange of value is possible.
The second requirement for a currency is a store of value, i.e., people want a currency and they want some assurance that if they hold it, its value will not plummet rapidly and depreciate too quickly. Is there any advantage for cryptocurrencies as a store of value?
Not really. I think, this is where we get into a bit of gray area, right? Where if you actually hold on to a Bitcoin for too long, you don't know what store of value you have. And that's where it resembles behavior closer to equity rather than, being closer to a currency. Contrast that with saying I have dollars, sort of in my pocket right now. 10 days later, how much would it move to? Potentially maybe 3%, even in like a really, really volatile season. But Bitcoin, it may move 10, 15, 20%, and you wouldn't be none the wiser. So I think, that's where we have a little bit of a gray area, right? Because some people would say it's fine with me because there's a bull run, because, people who had $8,000 worth of Bitcoin suddenly are sitting on $50,000 worth of Bitcoin. They're quite happy. And they would say, yeah, I mean, it's good for me. it's the right currency to hold on to.
Hmm.
But equally, people who have bought at 50,000, who are currently at 35,000, go like, I've just put my life savings in it and I have no idea what to do now. So there are arguments on both sides that suggest that it might not be that stable in terms of a currency just yet, not in its current shape and form.
I mean, the argument that people who are in favor of cryptocurrencies have used to me is simply that paper currencies, earlier you called them fiat currencies, the problem is that the central banks all over the world are printing their electronic presses and printing infinite amounts of money, huge amounts of money. And the beauty of, let's say, Bitcoin is that the algorithm that originally established Bitcoin has put a limit, okay, a very strong limit on the amount of Bitcoin that can ever be. And as the number of Bitcoin increases, the amount of work you need to do to mine or generate more Bitcoin increases. So by design, by definition, there is a huge guarantee that the supply of Bitcoin will not increase. So surely, if that is the case, then it is actually a better store of value than paper currencies, which, as we cannot trust the central banks to stop printing more and more.
Correct. Arguably, that would hold if there are no other internal forces that change the value of that holding per se, right? But then, if the initial coin holders of Bitcoin, or folks who have bought it when there was like $5 or $10, whatever, now are sitting on mounds and mounds of Bitcoin. If they sell, a billion every day, you'll see the value of Bitcoin plummet. Now then, the question becomes the finiteness of the currency itself, whilst being a good store value, is not good enough to ensure that it is stable in times of volatility. So it's like one working against the other. Right now, even if you have like a few $billion of dollar USD trade, in an hour, a couple of hours, it's not going to really change the world of the face. I mean, the face of the world economy, right? And that of the FX markets. That's where I think the inherent volatility for Bitcoin, Bitcoin specifically, and I'm not talking about crypto more broadly because some cryptos tend to be more stable than the others. But for Bitcoin specifically, yeah, I mean, the massive volatility isn't really helping it. And even its finiteness isn't really, an assurance that it is a good store of value. Because if it goes in the other way around, it's not a storage of value per se, right? It's a destruction of value just by holding on to it.
I mean, Bitcoin may be finite. There are many other currencies. So if the argument for Bitcoin is that it's finite and therefore a store of value, but if anybody can create another competing cryptocurrency, then the supply is potentially very large. There are no barriers to entry, it seems. There is Ethereum and Ripple and many others. So that is potentially the problem.
That's yeah. In fact, one sort of pointed argument that we could take is this, right? So let's suppose we say Bitcoin actually becomes the next world currency, right, for example, and if it does happen, everybody everywhere starts to adopt it, and it's all well and good, etc. But we run into some problem, right? Let's suppose X feature of it doesn't work. Tomorrow you could have somebody coming and saying, I'm releasing Bitcoin version 2, which has all the features of Bitcoin 1, but here's Bitcoin 2 and it has nothing to do with Bitcoin 1, so everybody starts switching here. It becomes like an ad nauseum and infinitum sort of an argument where because cryptos aren't really owned by any central bank anywhere, because they're not being regulated anywhere, you could potentially keep your money flow almost infinite, just based on infinite demand. Which is where the traditional currencies don't allow that to happen. Even if they're being printed by a central bank, they are printed, and every central bank will have a record of how much they've printed. So they will also know, therefore, how much is in macroeconomic circulation at any point in time, and they regulate it. If they don't, then they will see currencies fall to the ground and crash, like this in the case of Zimbabwe, etc., Venezuela. But there are arguments pro and against control currencies. We've seen very successful control currencies like Chinese yuan and Indian rupee. We've seen completely open capitalistic currencies sort of help being the world reserve currencies like the dollars. My personal view again is we can't have, at least crypto coming in and being the alternative savior when there are several alternatives within crypto itself.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. So maybe we can look to the future. And given your expertise, and you've worked at TransferWise, which effectively is displacing the banks in terms of money transfer, but you've also worked at Standard Chartered. Let's say if we look forward in 10 years' time, what kind of a role in the financial system will cryptocurrencies play, do you think?
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, and this is where I think I diverge from some traditionally held sort of opinions. Simon Sinek once famously said, you won't fire your kids, if they don't perform, right? So it's the same thing, I think, in terms of our logic with existing fiat currencies. I'm not here to sit and argue that, everything is perfect in the world of fiat currencies. There are things that are broken. There are several things that need fixing. But I think, there's are potentially fixable issues. There are operational and economic issues that can be fixed with concerted effort. I think the key lies in proper regulation for these currencies as well. But in a world where, crypto currently the way it is right now, without regulation, I don't see it being, a dependable and trustable unit for a currency in at least, the next 10 years, if it's not regulated in any form. Again, that is my personal view. And that, I think, is further reinforced by the point that if at all we find a cryptocurrency that is perfect, it's only a one better technology, one iteration, one other iPhone release away from saying we have crypto 1.1, which is an even better version. And therefore, we would never ever get to a perfect version unless there is a ceiling, a cap. And when you talk ceiling, you're talking regulation. So it sort of, to my mind, falls into this plane of argument where you need to have a certain ceiling set for yourself. You need to have rules set for how crypto behaves. And in a regulated sense, cryptocurrencies do have their place under the sun. But right now, as unregulated entities, it's not as currencies, it's as equities at best. So if people want to make a killing from just investing in it, getting returns or not, it's completely up to them. Equity holdings are completely different to currencies. I don't see crypto, at least, being a currency for the immediate sort of tactical next few years, unless structurally, they really change things.
So you're talking about regulation and trust. So we're back to some central authority, some recognized, established authority you can trust. If I had a £10 note in my pocket, it says, there's a message from the Bank of England. I promise to pay the bearer or something like that, right?
Yes.
But if you have Bitcoin, where are you going to go to demand payment or restitution in some sense? So one final question then, which comes from that. The central banks are behaving in different ways. I think in India, they've said they want to ban Bitcoin, but the Chinese central bank is musing about forming an official digital currency. In your view, and we've only got 1 minute, what do you think is the appropriate stance that the central bank should take about Bitcoin?
I think, if they have a properly regulated official blockchain related cryptocurrency, I'd actually think we're witnessing the future here, right? I mean, this is something that I'm personally, a student to, and I want to learn how this is going. Banning something never really gives appropriate sort of responses to what innovation should happen. When we disrupt ourselves, that's when we are really innovating, right? I mean, that's the definition of it in the first place. So as a human race, I mean, if we go forward in time 100 years and then look back at this time, we probably might just say, what the Chinese are doing are probably, the right thing in terms of allowing it to happen, but in a controlled sense, because they're famous for pulling the plug if it doesn't suit their interests, right? So if there was something intrinsically bad happening to the economy, I'm 100% sure that, the Chinese central bank would pull back. But if it does work out, which is a 50% likelihood, then we are seeing how a regulated stablecoin is actually going to perform. Will it really disrupt the way that we are working? Will it really teach us new paradigm shifts in how operating models can really evolve, that definitely remains to be seen. And to be honest, I think we should all carry that view that, blockchain has infinite sort of applicability. We just don't know where in the world of currencies. So might as well experiment and find out.
Okay, thank you very much, Murali. So I think our summary is that blockchain, everybody should be aware of and will become a very useful technology in many fields. And perhaps we may have a official digital cryptocurrency backed by one or more of the central banks. Murali, thank you very much for your time. It's been very useful for me. As I said at the beginning, my knowledge is in equities and bonds. So currencies, cryptocurrencies anyway, I'm very happy to have learned a few things from you. Thank you very much. And with that, we'll pass it back over to the India Inc. group.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.